So I will just start by showing this nice paleogeographic reconstruction of the American continents. And so this is the goal of this class, is to try to get you to understand how to make this kind of things, because these are very important components for doing the paleobiogeography studies that we want to do. So today I will do this lecture so you understand what goes into that. And for Monday, you will make actually this reconstruction that you are looking at right now, okay? Because we are starting a big theme on the Great American Biotic Interchange. And so this is a major component of this debate, is when do the continents connect? And so you will make this reconstruction, actually. We will teach you how to do this. And to prepare for that, you need to go on the Moodle and to do a few tutorials so you understand how the software, so you have to download the software and then understand a little bit how it works. The software is called gplate. Maybe some of you heard of it before. And it enables to make these nice maps. We'll go into that. And then for next week, actually next Wednesday, right? We will have a debate on the Great American Biotic Interchange. And for this, next Wednesday, sorry, I'm confused. We have a lecture again about the Great American Biotic Interchange. So we will explain the ground or the basis for this debate. And to prepare for this, you will just have to read one paper and annotate with some questions like you are used to. And there is a podcast that goes with this paper. And this will be on the Moodle. I will put it today. Maybe it's already in there, I'm not sure. Okay, and then on Monday, the following Monday, December 7, then we will have the debate. And so we need to define 4 people who will present. Okay, this is part of the class that you have to do some presentation. And so we will start at this time. And so starting today, we want some volunteers to present. Yeah, so maybe at the end of the class or during the break, we can go over this, or we can deal with this through emails. All right, do you have any questions on this? All right, so if you have no questions, I continue and start how to make paleo reconstructions. So this is a nice example here. This is from Chris Coetzee, so he's been working on this for all of his career, making these beautiful maps of the past. So this is what I call paleogeographic reconstructions. And so this class will go through 3 different stages. So first, we will look at the movement of tectonic plates. So how to position all these different little plates in there. And then we will look at the deformation of these plates. And so how mountains formed and seas and all this. And then at the end, I will present you how to actually make the paleogeography. So the tools that we have to create topography, bathymetry, and put the shorelines and everything. Okay. So we have a website. Actually, we designed a website for doing this kind of stuff and presenting these reconstructions. I don't know if you see that website. I'm not sure.
Yes, we see the website.
Okay, great. That's good. Okay, so you can play with it if you want, and you don't want to listen to the lecture. Here, you can go in the past. It takes a little bit of time. It's just to give you an idea. So you can see the plates. The plates are moving a little bit. I'm now at 4 million years in the past. And for some of the time intervals, we also have reconstructions where we did the topography and the mountains and the seas. It takes a little bit of time to load because this is still under construction. But it will appear if everything goes right. Yes. Okay, so this is one of the reconstructions we did at 20 million years. So you see it's a little bit different than today. There are some seas everywhere, the continents are moved. And so yeah, so this is what I want to show you today, how to get there. Okay, so I just want to take a little step back here because I know that some of you are not geologists or didn't have so much geology. And so I need some help from the geologist here. So my question to the geologist, how do plate tectonic work? Anybody want to explain that based on this figure here? Some geology?
I can try. I'm not a geologist, okay, but I can try to do like a very roughly summary.
Okay, great. That's very nice of you.
So we have a subducting plate there, like the oceanic crust is weight a bit more than the continental crust. So when they get together, the oceanic crust tend to go down and to subduct into the mantle.
Yeah.
And this is what we get like in the subduction, the subducting plate.
Mm-hmm.
And this can cause orogeny. So this can create yeah, in the continental crust, the formation of the mountains. And sometimes the subducting zones will also create some volcanic area because of the melting of the plate, which will go then up again in the origin, in the mountain.
Yeah, so here exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
some of the sediments that are brought down are bringing some water, and it melts. The water melts the lithosphere, and then it starts to go up, go back in the volcano. Exactly. What else can you say?
And yeah, in the middle of in the center of the figure, there is a ridge, which is also part of the yeah, plate tectonic, where is it basaltic?
Yes, it's basaltic. So basaltic is a type of rock.
Yeah, basaltic magma will just go out thanks to this thinning of the crust, and they like the plates are going are
spreading
kind of.
Yeah, they are spreading, so it's called a spreading ridge.
Divergent.
Yeah. So why are they spreading? Do you know? Anybody knows?
Due to the ridge push effect?
So that's one of the hypotheses, is the ridge push. Actually, we don't really know. Right? It's either ridge push or slab pull. So we don't know if it's actually pushing here or if it's the slab that is getting so heavy that it's pulling the plate. Okay, but in a more general term, you can see above, it was already formulated in 1929. So in more general terms, what is the driver of plate tectonics? Let me go back to the driver of plate tectonics. Maybe I'll take over a little bit so we move on. So in fact, so we think that the plate motion, or quite sure, is due to convective motion in the mantle. And so what happened is you have warmer material coming up in the mantle that is not completely melted, but partially melted. And then when it comes up here, it cools and it forms these basalts, okay? So basaltic rocks. And then the plates are formed. So plates are the lithospheric plates. So it's a part of the Earth that is actually a little bit more hard. Okay, that's what we see here in this brown color. And as you go further away from the spreading ridge, you get older and older crust, and it gets heavier and heavier. And so your plate becomes heavier, and it will sink into the mantle. Okay, this is what Alice really nicely explained with the subduction zone. Okay, and then when it goes down, it starts to melt again and to warm up again. Okay, as you go towards the center of the Earth, and then as it gets warm, it goes around and will go up into the spreading ridge. Right? This is, I think most of you already know that. One thing you might not know and that we will need later on is these hotspots. Here, hotspots. So this is the same basically, except you just have a much smaller plume of mantle coming up, and that will turn into magma in some cases as its pressure goes down, and it will create this chain of volcanoes like the Hawaiian chain. So this is what we call a hotspot, but it's not a spreading ridge. Okay, it's not going to spread, and you don't have creation of oceanic crust or oceanic lithosphere. It's just a puncture of volcanoes. Okay, another thing we didn't mention is that, so you can have, Alice really well explained, you can have mountain formation because of compression. So this is typical in a subduction zone. But sometimes also you can have extension, okay, and you create continental rifts. So we will go back to this in lecture later when we talk about the East African rift. And here, this can be due to the rollback of the slab. So the slab is coming down, and maybe if the speed of the plates is going down, the slab might just hang down. You know, it rolls back, and that takes the continental lithosphere above. It brings it towards the rolling back, the slab rolling back, and then you get this extension in the back arc. It's called. Okay. Any other questions on this? Because now we will talk about something else.
I actually didn't get how the volcanoes are formed. I think I was a bit too slow.
Okay, so there are different ways volcanoes can be formed. Actually, they form in all of these different settings, tectonic settings. So in a subduction plate, to repeat, so what happens is that the sediments that are deposited on the oceanic crust, they have some water in them, okay, just a tiny bit of water. And when some of the sediments, so most of them, they will be scraped off the crust here, and they will stay in this accretionary prism. But some of them will come down with the plate, with the lithospheric plate. And because of the water, it will warm up like crazy. Okay, I mean, if you warm up a rock, it's okay, but if there is water in it, it will start to melt. And so these melts are much lighter and they go up. And as the pressure goes down, also they melt even more. And so you create this magmatic chamber, and then you create your volcano. Okay, this can happen also when you are spreading apart, because some of the warm mantle is coming up and the pressure goes down, and so you create some volcanoes also in there. It's very well shown on this nice figure. And of course, you can create this in hotspots as well, where you have volcanoes and puncturing the lithosphere, coming from really deep. Any other questions? So I continue. So I will start the first part, how to reconstruct plate positions. Okay. So here I'm asking again, some of you geologists here or other maybe know the answer to that question. How do we know where plates used to be? No answer. Okay. So one thing we have seen already in the last lecture. So this is here Alfred Wegener, our friend from Berlin. And already in the early 20th century, he proposed that plates used to be one big Pangean plate. So the basis for this is actually looking at fossils and rock types. But since then, a lot of work has been done, and I will explain you how we actually can position all these plates very precisely now. So actually before Wegener, people already proposed this, and so I like to show this slide because this is a fellow Frenchman who proposed this already much earlier, just on the basis of the shape of the continents. But at this time, of course, it was considered completely nuts. And then people like Wegener or some paleontologists or geologists started to recognize the evidence. So looking at fossils, how they fit, you know, it was not possible anymore to have these long bridges carrying everything, huge reptiles across the ocean. And so this was started to be a strong hypothesis. There was also paleogeographic tools, so you could look at environments. So for example, coal, deserts, and especially glaciers. So glaciated areas found in the sediments in India, for example, didn't fit at all and fit much better with being part of Antarctica. And so this is the kind of arguments that were proposed. But the problem with this is it's not very precise, as you can imagine. And so one revolution, and that really is the way we proved the plate tectonic theory, came from marine magnetic anomalies. So these are anomalies that were observed by towing a magnetometer behind a ship in the 50s and 60s. And so when you map these magnetic anomalies, their intensity, you can see that they are shifting around, and they seem to be mirroring the other side of the ocean through the spreading ridge. Like you can see here this mid-Atlantic ridge, and you see this kind of magnetic stripes, as sometimes called. And so this was observed by people in the 60s, this in particular Harry Hess, who had proposed the spreading ridge hypothesis. But still it was hypothesis, and there was no way to really prove plate tectonics. So do you have any idea how these magnetic stripes could help to reconstruct plate motion?
I think the ferromagnetic atoms in the sediments orientated along the the current magnetic field, and then they were like frozen when the sediments were lithified, and therefore they preserved the magnetic field from the state when they were proposed to the upper part of the lithosphere when they were at the ridge.
Exactly. Yeah, very good answer. So do you know also why the magnetic field was changing regularly like this? Okay, so
Dr. Is it not because the magnetic field is switching, like the North Pole becomes the South Pole?
yeah, exactly.
Period.
Yeah, very good answer, Mario. So sometimes the field is reversing its polarity. And so when the field reverses polarity, the magnetic field acquired, so when the basalts are forming here at the ridge, is going to be opposite. And so So in the end, the rocks get magnetized and they have an opposite magnetization, whether they are magnetized during one direction or the opposite direction. Okay, and then you create these anomalies. I'm going to show you a few figures, so it's good. I mean, together you have you know everything, so it's just a matter of sharing information. Okay, so this is what the magnetic field of the Earth looks like. So it's similar to a magnet with these magnetic lines here. This is just a computer simulation of the magnetic field. And so you can see that these lines show where actually the North Pole is. And so they will converge here towards the North Pole. So when you're at the equator, you will have a field that is horizontal, but when you're in the pole, you will have a magnetic field that is more like vertical. Okay. And so this was already observed in the 17th century because people were navigating a lot with compasses. And so it was already proposed that the field of the Earth is a bit like a dipole. Okay, there are different types of magnets. You can have more complex, but we are lucky this is a very simple dipole, except it's very weak compared to a regular magnet. And so when rocks form, they actually acquire the magnetic field. So especially, so this is a picture of lava turning into basalts. And this is what happens at the bottom of the ocean in a spreading ridge. And so the field gets recorded by the minerals and by the rocks. So they kind of freeze. It's like a frozen compass. And this can work also with sediments. Actually, small particles that are magnetic in sediments align with the magnetic field. And when they are deposited, they preserve this magnetic direction. So it's called a remanent magnetization when it's kept in a rock. And this can stay in rocks for billions of years. It depends what type of rocks. So the other thing that Mario was mentioning is that the field reverses. So this is already known since not so long, actually, discovered by another Frenchman. And in fact, by looking at different sedimentary layers that were deposited from older to younger, okay, so you get the older deposits and then you get younger and younger. And if these rocks are magnetic enough, you can actually measure the magnetization, or at least see if they are going more towards down or towards up. Okay, so if you are in a normal polarity, like today, you would get, this is actually wrong, this figure. This should be the reverse polarity. Sorry. So where the South Pole is to the north. So this has been flipped out somehow. Sorry, this is a bit confusing, but this should be the normal polarity. So let's look at this one. So in a normal polarity configuration, you get in the northern hemisphere, you will get a magnetic field that goes down. And in a reverse polarity configuration, the magnetic field is going up. Okay. And so this is shown by these little arrows here. And so at different periods of deposition, you will get either a normal polarity or a reverse polarity. And people found that out just by looking with a compass, with a very simple magnetometer in the beginning, and they found that this reversal existed. Okay, and so we go back to the spreading ridge. So this is exactly what you were explaining. So when you form the spreading ridge, so we start in the past here 4 million years ago, and so you create your oceanic crust made of basalt that is acquiring a field. and it will be either in a normal or in a reverse polarity direction, and you get these marine magnetic anomalies that are mirroring the one from the other side of the ridge, and that are also regularly positioned. So just for the story here.
Sorry, may
Yes,
I ask
please.
something? How again does this magnetic anomaly how do the rocks reflect these changes from normal to reverse polarity? I think I don't get that still.
So this you understand, no? When so rocks form, they record the magnetic field a little
Yeah.
bit like a compass that gets frozen, okay?
Yeah.
And then what happens is so if you are in so the field reverses polarity sometimes, and so
Okay.
the North Pole becomes the South Pole.
Yeah, I think now I get it. So the sediments are in different ages, so they reflect the polarity which was recent this time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Either normal or reverse. Very simple.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Please ask questions. If you don't understand, it's great, and then everybody, I'm sure, gets it. Because this will be important for understanding how we position plates. Okay, so you get these magnetic stripes. Yeah, and I wanted to say this is actually how people proved plate tectonics. So, you know, the plate tectonic theory remained a theory actually until 1962, 63, when these guys proved the plate motion and the spreading ridge and the whole story using these magnetic stripes, these marine magnetic anomalies. So this is how plate tectonics has been proved. So I have another question for you. How do we know the age of the marine magnetic anomalies?
The age of the sediments is related to their distance to the oceanic ridge. If they are pushing more in the direction of the continent.
Okay, so what do you mean by sediments? Which sediment?
Yeah, I mean the crust, which is striped black and white in the picture. So the more inner parts, more at the ridge, are younger than the outer parts.
Yeah, exactly. So this is old. So you create these basalts, okay, and these here on the left at the end are older than the one that are just being created. But how do you date them? How actually can you date these rocks?
I can try it maybe by, I don't know the English word for this. There's a German word called Bohrkerne. So maybe these marine magnetic anomalies are only one layer. So if you wait. So if you make this hole with this sediments, you should have these layers of the different orientation of the magnets of the minerals, so that you can project them on these on this crust.
Okay, so you are talking about this stuff here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer as well. So it's actually two different ways to date the reversals, to date the marine magnetic anomalies. So one is to actually collect some rocks here. And this is done by drilling a core through the sediment and then collecting a rock at the base in the basalt. And then the basalt can be dated by radiometric dating. And we'll go back on this radiometric dating later, but this is a bit like carbon-14, or in this case, we will use different methods. But so then you have different places where you can date your sediments, your oceanic basalts here. Okay, and then you can interpolate the ages in between to get the age of the reversals. So the answer is here if you don't understand my English. The other way that Charlotte mentioned, and that's very interesting, is that actually when you drill a core here, you can find the magnetic polarities in the sediments, in the core that you drilled. So this is exactly the same as here. A long normal polarity zone and then a reverse normal reverse. You can find it here. And so then you just need to date the sediments. And this is also, there are techniques for this, and we'll go in the class, we'll go over that. Not this class today, but later classes, how to date the sediments. Okay. Other comments or I continue? All right. So once you have the marine magnetic anomalies, this is how you get from these anomalies to plate tectonics. And this is something that has been developed since the 60s, but really very well in the 90s, actually, because we had much better dates and much better marine magnetic anomalies. And so you can see here, this is in the Atlantic somewhere, and we recognize some marine magnetic anomalies. And we have a very good age for the reversals. And so the idea is to retrofit different marine magnetic anomalies back to the spreading ridge. Okay. So I show you in these figures how this actually works. So this is an example for the restoration of Iberia. And you can see here in the Atlantic, you have different marine magnetic anomalies. They are shown here as A34, M0, M3. So these lines are actually the anomalies. And here you have, in fact, you have this triple junction. So you have three different ridges coming together. And these points here show the evolution of this triple junction. So it used to be, so this is the past position of this triple junction. In green, you get this path, in blue and in gray here. And it will appear more clearly if we retrofit them. So going back in time. So this is what it used to be when it was all closed, okay? And then when you open it, it rotates Iberia. Okay, do you understand how it works?
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Is the position of the spreading ridge assumed to be stable?
No, it's actually moving, if you look, but it's only retrofitting the different marine magnetic anomalies.
Okay.
So this is the basis for that. It's not assumed to be stable, and there is another way also I will show you just later. You can actually better fit the position of the plates. Okay. Another thing that you can notice on these figures at the base here, it says total shortening and rotation. And this is talking about Iberia. And so the shortening between the Pyrenees, between the France and Spain, which is expressed in the Pyrenees. And so by looking at the plate motion, so reconstructing the plate motion, you can also estimate how much shortening, so how much compression, how much convergence there is or has occurred between plates, and how the Pyrenees were formed, for example. So this is what we'll go look at later in this lecture. All right. Okay, so to answer your question about this, how to position plates and this triple junction, actually you can look, so the way it works actually between two plates, you defined what is called a pole of rotation, or a Euler pole on a sphere. And this will describe the rotation of one plate with respect to the other between a given time, okay, between, in this case, one marine magnetic anomaly, the time when it was formed, and the time the next anomaly was formed. And so this is shown here. This was formalized already by Alan Cox. This is one of his drawings. And you can see that you get velocities from the marine magnetic anomalies, but this will result in an uncertainty on the pole of rotation. And actually between the different parts of the oceanic crust, there are these transforms. So there are small regions where the plates are splitting in a strike-slip direction. And these transform faults can be used to define the pole of rotation, actually. And so based on looking at these features, actually on maps of the ocean bottom, we can define the pole of rotation between two plates. And so this pole of rotation is, so it's going to be latitude and longitude. So we have a position for the pole. And then it's a time interval in million years. So between, let's say, 40 and 42, or 42 and 40 million years, plate A moved so many degrees out of plate B. And this with respect to a pole of rotation. So what you need to give for that is the position of the pole, the time interval, and the angle of rotation.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I'm wondering how can the transform folds show you the pole of rotation? I don't really get what kind of cues are there.
Okay, so maybe this drawing, good question, huh? Maybe this drawing is a bit too simple, but you can look here on this one. Okay, you see the red line here?
Mm-hmm.
Between plate A and plate B. So this is a transform fault.
Mm-hmm.
So in fact, the plates, when they open up like this, because of the shape of the Earth, they need to shift on these transform faults. You cannot just open one big tear throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And so these transform faults, they are along a small circle.
Yeah,
You see?
right. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
right. I think
the center of this small circle is the pole of rotation. Okay.
Yeah, right. Cool. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so sorry, it's a little bit of geometry here, but it's very nice you asked the question. I forgot to mention the small circle here. But so if you have many of these transform faults, like you see on this map of the ocean bottom, then you can draw a perpendicular line from them, and you get where they cross the pole of rotation. So this is really how the plates are reconstructed. It's nice to go through that, because now, so we will use G-Plates. It's a software that you will install to get ready for the exercise on Monday. And G-Plates does everything for you. And so you don't really have to know where the data is coming from. That's why I wanted to explain that. But now you know how this pole of rotations, where they come from, and how the age of the rotation is defined. But when you will use these G-Plates, everything you need to know. So there is a rotation file, and all you have to enter is the pole of rotation and the time interval and the angle of rotation. And it will just rotate the plate. We'll see that next time. So actually, this has been formalized with a lot of math because well, we are dealing with a lot of plates on the Earth, and we promise we will not do too much math here, so I will not go in detail in these equations. These nerds already did it for us, and this time I will not go in detail. But just to explain what they did, so they defined some plates, assuming that the plates do not deform. Okay, they are rigid plates, and then they applied these equations to all of the respective continents by retrofitting these marine magnetic anomalies. Okay, and this was done to create this global model that I'm going to show you. So this is actually a version from 2004, but it hasn't changed that much since then. And you can see, so I like this figure, it's old, but you can see the plates are very clearly defined, and you can see the marine magnetic anomalies, okay, here in the oceans, and all of them on the Earth. So you see that there is a lot of data, and this is used to retrofit. So at each time step, so we start today, up 10 million years, 20 million years, you can follow how the anomalies are fit together. Okay, and this is where it stops. So we stop at 110. We can go a little bit further, actually, because you can see that there are still some marine magnetic anomalies here in the Atlantic that will enable to close up this gap. But apart from this, you know, there are a little bit here in the Pacific, but that's not very useful. But then beyond this, we don't have marine magnetic anomalies anymore. So it becomes difficult to make reconstructions. Okay. So now I want to ask you a few questions so we can go further with this. So the first question, how to position converging plates? So for example, here, India and Asia, there are no marine magnetic anomalies in between. You can see there is a big Tethys Ocean here. It doesn't exist anymore. But can someone tell me, how do you get the relative position of India with respect to Asia? Also, you don't have marine magnetic anomalies in between. So the way it's done, actually, you can see, that's why I'm showing this moving, is that you position Asia with respect to North America. Okay, here there are some marine magnetic anomalies in between. And then North America is positioned with respect to Africa through the Atlantic marine magnetic anomalies. And then Africa is positioned with respect to India through the Indian Ocean marine magnetic anomalies. Okay, so if you have here two continents like India and Asia that are converging, so the ocean in between is being subducted, is disappearing, still you can get a very precise relative motion by going through what is called the plate circuit, okay? Because you know the position of plates in between them, all right? Is it clear? No questions? So I can go on with the next questions, hopefully. So these are more difficult questions, actually, that will allow to continue this class. So the first one is a key question, is how to position plate circuits with respect to the Earth axis. So here you need to understand, okay, we know the position of plates with respect to each other, but we don't have an absolute reference. So if all of the plates are suddenly moving together, or if there is some kind of motion of all the plates, we cannot see that with the methods that we have. So is there any idea how this can be done? So one hint is that we can use paleomagnetism to do that. All right. So I will go on with the other questions before explaining this, because the answer is similar, is how to position a block between converging plates. And so this question is, you see this block, for example, here between India and Asia. There are no marine magnetic anomalies, and still we have a position for that, okay? And in this case, you cannot use different continents, okay, because there are no connecting continents with marine magnetic anomalies. And so here again, we will use paleomagnetism to do that. And then the last question is just to introduce the last part of this class, is that plates actually can deform. So in this, when we do these reconstructions, we assume that plates are staying rigid, but in fact they do deform. And so if you look at India, for example, you see that it used to be a very big plate, but when it collides with Asia, it starts to, part of it will subduct, part of it will be deformed. Okay, so plates can actually deform. All right. And so this will be the basis for the rest of the class. So what do you say? We take a small break, maybe a few minutes. You can ask some questions, and then we'll go back into the class.
Do you answer the questions you've asked? Because I really don't get how you can position a block without having the magnetic anomalies to look at.
Yeah.
Like, my questions are your questions. I've got no clue.
Okay. All right. Well, I can continue. The answer is relatively.
Can I try to?
Yes, please, if you have some ideas.
So I don't know if this will work actually, but so a block, we can date when the rock is formed, and according to the to the axis, like we know approximately how the magnetic field at that point was, and then we can see at least the orientation of that plate.
Yes.
When it was formed. But yeah, I don't know like where the position, how to position that. And this could this help to position also the plate in the map?
Yeah, absolutely. I will explain, and actually it's quite precise. It's not as precise as marine magnetic anomalies, but when you have a lot of data, a lot of rocks that are have this frozen compass in there, you can put them together, and it will give you an idea where the magnetic north used to be, and so the magnetic north is on average close to the geographic north, the rotation axis of the Earth. And so you have a compass in the past with magnetism.
Yeah.
Another possibility is to use hotspots. That's the other way to. Can you imagine? Can someone imagine how hotspot could be used?
Maybe I can. In case of Hawaii, you can see a shift, I think 70 million years ago, of the movement of the big Pacific plate.
Yes.
So if you're looking at the old parts of this plume, so like the old volcanoes, you can see shift in the direction of these ridges.
Yes, exactly. So the hotspot is like a laser that is pointing on the Earth's crust, and as the crust is moving above, it will leave a trace on the ocean floor, and these traces are volcanoes, like the island chain of Hawaii. And so this, if the hotspot is not moving, if it stays always at the same position, it will leave it leaves an absolute reference for the position of plates. But one way to, I have a figure here that summarizes this stuff. And so here, I mean, it's more theoretical, but you have a plate. So this plate M is moving to the left. Okay, it's rotating. And you see that these volcanoes coming from the hotspot below are being formed. So today at 0 MA, it's here. But when the plate was 20 million years ago more to the right, then this volcano formed. Okay, and since 20 million years, it has moved to the left. Okay, and so you can do this for 40, 60, 80 million years, and this is what the trace would look like. And so what Jan is mentioning is that for the Pacific plate, so it was moving along like this very nicely, and then suddenly it changed its Euler pole. So the pole of rotation changed for some reason. And because of that, so the hotspot didn't move, but the plate started to move in a different way. And so in the hotspot track, you see a very strong angle in the track. Okay, I will try to find a figure later, but I think you start to understand. So this is one way to position the plates. And the other way is to take samples from within the plate, so rock samples that have recorded the magnetic field. And so, for example, you could take samples from these volcanoes here, and each of these volcanoes, from each one, you could get the north magnetic pole. Okay, so today you would get the north magnetic pole here at the position of the geographic pole. But on the volcano that is 20 million years old, from the rock, you could deduce the north magnetic pole to be a little bit further to the left here. Okay, and so this is this is called the apparent polar wander path, or this is because this is how the pole looks or seems to be wandering here if you go in the past. So if you take samples from all these different volcanoes, you will get a different north pole. And it's not the north pole that has been moving, but it's the plate that has moved. Okay, yeah, so for each plate, you can get this path. So the way the north pole seems to be moving, actually it's the motion of the plate, this apparent polar wander path. And so this is shown on this figure where you see all the different paths from the different continents. Okay, and so what we do is, because we know the motion of the plates with respect to each other, we can take all of this data from each continent back to 180 million years or something like this, when we know the motion of the plate. And we can put all this data together by rotating it into one continent. So usually we use Africa, that hasn't moved so much. So we take all the data from North America, for example, where there is a lot of data, and we rotate this data of the past pole of the Earth. Okay, we rotate all this into Africa, and then we rotate all the data from Europe, from South America, and so that we have the global paleomagnetic data, so the global data of the north magnetic pole, and we use this to have a reference for the entire circuit. Okay. So this is going to be the reference pole for our plate motion. All right. I want to answer actually the last question that we had, which is what happens when plates are deforming, and how to position these blocks that are when you don't have marine magnetic anomalies. So here we use a lot of paleomagnetism, but we will also use other techniques. So on this little movie here, you can see the Indo-Asia collision. So India is here at the base, and you will see it travels across the Tethys Ocean. And all of these colors here in the middle, these are marine magnetic anomalies. So it's disappearing. So all of this was invented, actually. We don't know anything of this. But what we know is what is here in the Indian Ocean now. Now, if you look here, what's going on in the, in the last million years. Let me play that again. So you see that there are some blocks here. We don't know the position. Some of them are accreting here, but all of this is completely invented. It's not based on marine magnetic anomalies. And then at the end, all this gray area disappears and you form actually the mountains. So this is when both the Asian plate and the Indian plate are deforming a lot. And when you create all these mountains. So now what I want to explain is how to reconstruct that. So how to reconstruct the plates. So the motion of a small plate, and how to reconstruct the deformation and the formation of mountains. So here is an example from one of my students who worked on Burma. And he actually reconstructed the position of the Burma plate, so 40 million years ago and 95 million years ago. And this was a very interesting study because it was a complete surprise, actually. People thought that the Burma terrain had always been around this area and actually further to the north where it is today. But by looking at paleomagnetic data, actually, Jan was able to show that the Burma terrain used to be in the middle of the Tethys Ocean. So a very completely new discovery, and also with huge implications for biogeography, because in Burma is where we find this very nice amber full of insects and even some fossils of micro dinosaurs. So they found really like small birds and feathers and all kinds of stuff. And so people used to think that everything was in Asia 100 million years ago, but actually this is completely different environment. And so it's really changing things a lot. So how did we position that? So this is Jan here in the field, drilling, so collecting samples. Sorry, there is a phone ringing. Okay. Yeah, so this is stuff geologist student can do, collecting samples. So this is from sediment. This is a pile of sediment here shown on this log on the left. And so we took samples throughout the sediments and then dated the sediments to show that they were deposited between 40 and 35 million years. Okay. And then this is us again, so drilling this time plutonic rocks. So these are more like magmatic rocks, so rocks that are formed under a big volcano, and that will form these very hard, like granite or very strong rocks. But anyway, we can also date these rocks, and this time they were around 100 million years. And so this is what the data, the paleomagnetic data look like out of this. So this is from the sediments on this plot here. So don't be afraid, these are very simple plots showing the direction of the magnetic field in the past. And you see all the sediments that we took are pointing more or less to the north, northeast, okay? And all of these here pointing to the south are actually recording a reversed direction. Okay, we had normal and reverse, but they are also, so they can be interpreted to so I mean, it's normal that they are normal and reverse directions like this. This is what you get always. What is interesting is that they are not rotated, so a little bit with respect to north, both of them, but their inclination is very low. Okay, it should be around this, the inclination of the magnetic field, but it's very low. Okay, and this is the data for the 100 million year old rocks, which is also shown here in red. Okay, so this is the average of all the data, and here again the inclination is very low compared to what it should be if it was on Asia. So what is complex is maybe these figures, because you are looking at both the direction of the field with respect to the north and the inclination of the field. Okay, and so we saw in the beginning, if you are near the equator, the inclination of the field is very low. And then this point should be very near the edge of the plot, okay? And if the inclination is very steep, it comes towards the center, okay? And so all the inclination of the field are very low, and what they are saying is that the Burma terrain was close to the equator, okay? And what you see also is that the direction of the old rocks is towards the east, okay, instead of towards the north. So something happened there, it rotated. And this is more clear if I show you this plot here. So 95 million years ago, the Burma terrain is recording a position, a magnetic direction towards the north, okay? But if you look at the direction today, this direction that was acquired 95 million years ago, it's pointing towards the east. So what it means is that the terrain has rotated a lot. Okay, and this is why we can retro position the Burma terrain in this orientation. Okay. And what we see also is that the inclination is very low. And so that means the Burma terrain was at a very low latitude near the equator. Okay. So by doing this kind of stuff, we can position these blocks between these converging plates. Okay. And the reason I explain all this stuff is that during the exercise and the papers that you will read, there will be a lot of data like this, and so it will be important to understand what it means. So now what I want to talk about, and probably I don't have time to finish this, it's just an introduction about plate deformation. So here you should know a little bit more on this, at least a geologist. So I'm going back to this original figure of plate tectonism. And here you can see that, so what we explained in the beginning, at collision zone, you will create some mountains, or you might have some extension. And this is important because it enables to deform plates. And so when you are doing paleogeographic reconstructions, you want to look at the tectonic settings and to try to see how faults have been moving and how you can reconstruct this deformation of plates. Okay, so there are different types of tectonic settings. So when you have extension, you will get normal faults like this. And if you look at the strata, you can actually put them back together and to know how it was before the deformation. Okay, is this clear? Or any question on that? I think this is basic knowledge, but some of you might not even heard about a thrust fault like this, which separates a foot wall from a hanging wall. So this is in a compressive stage. So like in a subduction zone, you will create mountains like the Andes by pushing rocks onto the other. Okay, you can have also a case of strike-slip faults. So this is when plates slide. And in this case, you don't really create lots of mountains, but more maybe some gaps where sediments will accumulate, and these are basins. Okay, so it's just a very quick intro. And so how to reconstruct plate deformation. So we already saw how to reconstruct small blocks within a deforming zone. So with paleomagnetism. But you can also look at faults, so how the faults have moved. And so this is the second option here. So this is what people refer to as structural geology. So have you heard about this structural geology? I guess the geologists must have. Here this is an example of how this can be done. So this is a lot of field work. People go in the field and measure the orientation of rocks to be able to reconstruct the deformation. And this movie is a nice example. So this is showing how the geometry of the rocks as they have deformed can tell us how it used to be, and so how much shortening in this example has been accommodated by the different structures that you can measure in the field or that you can get from other data, from subsurface data. I'm going quite fast on this because it's, I think, basic geological knowledge. One thing that is interesting here is you see that, so this is a beginning state that was retro-deformed, but as you form mountains here, you get cooling. So this ZFT cooling and AFT cooling. So this means that the rocks, as they form, they are actually going up in the earth and they are cooling. And this is something I want to mention because it's often discussed. So now we have positioned our blocks and we can look at different type of data. So this is from our website. And this is all the data points that we have used to reconstruct the paleo mountains and oceans. Okay, so from this point, we want to get to this point, right? So now I explain you how to position the blocks. And now it's how to make the mountains, make the oceans, etc. Okay. So the way to do this is actually to look at basins, okay, so sedimentary records and mountain ranges, and both of them will record tectonic and climate changes in their archives. And so this, I'm now introducing a little bit what we will be discussing in the rest of the class, so in the following classes in geology. And so one of the goals of geologists is to quantify how mountains were built. Okay, so do you have any ideas what kind of tools can be used to do that? How do you know when a mountain was built and how high it was?
Maybe also by core drilling and C14 method. So if you drill to the lower sediments, you can estimate their age.
Mm-hmm. So in the basin here, you would drill and get
Maybe.
the age of the sediments. Right?
Maybe, yeah.
And so what would that tell you if you know the age of the sediments?
Just how old it is. So then you have to maybe compare it to upper layers or something. I don't know.
Okay, so maybe like in the cross section that we saw where everything is being deformed, you would look what has not been deformed and what has been deformed at what time, and this would tell you when the deformation occurred or something like that.
Well, I think I don't know enough about that, but
Okay.
yeah, this would be the first thing I would do. So yeah.
Okay, so but it's a good point. So you, one big topic we will cover in the following classes is how the sediments actually record the deformation and the formation of the mountains. You also have some sediments coming from the mountain that you find in the sedimentary basin that will tell us when they have been going up. Okay, this is one way to do it. The other way is to go to the mountains directly, and in the mountains you record also when they were uplifted. So in fact, when so you can measure actually if you take a topographic profile. So if you go up a mountain, you can collect some samples and look first at the age of cooling. Okay, so the age when they started to go up, and so to go down in temperature actually. So this can be dated, and I will explain you quickly how to do that. But this is a good way to date the uplift of the mountain. And another way is to look at stable isotopes. And so you look at how, so this is complex, but when you form a mountain belt, actually the rain that is falling on the mountain will have a different isotopic signature. And this signature gets preserved in the rocks, and you can actually measure that. And this can give you an idea of the past topography of the Earth. Okay, and this will be covered in following lectures. So it's just now to give you an introduction. So here I just want to explain quickly these techniques. It's called thermochronology. So this is a technique of dating the cooling of rocks. Okay, so you have rocks that are low and hot, and they go up through what's called the closure temperature, and when they cool down, they start to record the time. Okay, that's the basic principle. And so geologists can go and collect rocks through this profile. And so what happens in detail, and that's where you mentioned, yeah, we could use C14 techniques, and that's exactly what we do, except it's not C14. So you have crystals, and when they are hot, they are open actually. The elements can flow in them. But when you go through the closure temperature, they close. And so then elements that are formed in there will remain in the crystal. And so then you can measure how many were formed to date that sample. And this is better explained here in this figure. So when you have, for example, uranium, so a big, very unstable atom, and when it radiogenically forms thorium, then you will both have helium formed, and this helium will accumulate into the crystal. Okay. And at the same time, you release actually an alpha particle, and this particle will make a track in your crystal. And so the older your crystal, the more tracks it will have, and the more helium it will have in it. Okay. So if you can find these crystals in your mountain here, you can actually date when these crystals went through the closure temperature and started to accumulate helium and tracks. So this is the basic principle of thermochronology. Hopefully we can go a little bit further through this during the next classes. Okay. Yeah, and so there are different closure temperatures for different systems, and so you can use that for different mountain ranges. And with these tools, you can really date how mountains are going up and down. And this is actually a very big theme at Potsdam University. And you might be able to get very good classes with Ed Sobel and Peter van der Beek on this topic. Okay, and so I have just two more slides to present what we will do in the next classes. So one of the classes is called the proxy game, and so in this case we will be looking how sediments record environments, and so this is also very important for our topic because it will affect. So this will enable to see how the evolution is driven by climate change. And so this can be done with different techniques that we will present. And then we will also have the dating game class, where we show all the different techniques that can be used to date sediments, and then so precisely that you can compare them to global climate events. And yeah, that's it. So the making of paleogeographies will cover, not in the next lecture when we have our exercise, but the one after that. All right. So I think we come towards the end of the class, right? Do you have some questions or comments or stuff you want to discuss?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I just heard from a fellow student, Jan, that the C14 method is not working because the C14 method is only working until 50,000 years. So yeah, that's why you have to look on the radioactive and isotopes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. C14 is only really because the half-life of C14 is very short. Basically, after 50 million years, all the carbon 50,000 years, yeah, has been changed to the daughter element, and so you don't produce any C14 anymore, and so you cannot really date. So that's why you use different methods, and this is what I showed on these slides. So these are the methods that are used by geologists, and you can see at no, these are just the closure temperatures. I didn't put the age. That's another slide. But for example, if you use, for example, uranium lead here, you can go back billions of years. And with this technique, you can also date stuff that is maybe a million year old or something like that. So these are much better for geologists than C14.
Yeah, we have a whole class on dating, so
Yeah,
we will talk about these things in more detail later.
But we don't talk about C14 actually.
I can say a few words here and there. I use it a lot.
All right, any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Yeah, and talking about papers, so Guillaume has mentioned at the beginning that we have 4 papers which we are going to discuss not on next Monday, but the Monday after the next, which is
Yeah, I have that.
Which is December 7th, is that correct? Yeah. So you can think already. So we have 4 papers, and you can scream now and say, I take 1 paper, and the papers are gone. Yeah. So we just do it first come, first served. So there's no, you know, no other way we can do this. Everyone should at least present once a paper. So you can choose 1 paper. Now, these are all about the Great American Biotic Interchange. The exercise you have to do, which Guillaume posted on Moodle, is due next Monday. So on Monday, you are supposed to come into the class with some results of the G-plates, and the class on Monday is solely dedicated to this exercise. Next Wednesday, I talk about the topic in a lecture, and you're supposed to read this paper here, Stone 2013. And then the following Monday, we hear from you. So there's no lecture.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, we still have some time until December 7th, but I think you should start thinking if you want to present. And just to give you an idea what it is, actually these papers are really combining geology and biology, but some are more geology oriented or biology oriented. And they debate on when was the time of the closure of the Panama. So when did the 2 continents, the 2 American continents, when they connect. And so this is why next week actually we will do this exercise to basically make this reconstruction and show and try to, from the geology, to know when the continents collided, and so that the Great American Biotic Interchange could take place. And so the week after that, we will give another lecture about the Great American Biotic Interchange, and then on the Monday, December 7th, you will present actually these papers and we have a debate. All right, well, I think it's everybody's clear with that. So let's say we send an email to everybody and then you can volunteer to present 1 of these papers. And this we should do at least next Monday. No? We should have an answer.
I think on Monday we should decide who is going to present, but there's enough time to prepare that.
Yeah, so you have enough time, yeah, to prepare all week.
Because the other thing is, for this Monday, December 7th, everybody is supposed to read all papers. Yeah, so that we have a discussion. So it's going to be intense reading. That's why we say this hour already now, and we'll probably post the papers soon. You can start downloading and looking at them.